Today I'd like to show you a web page that's more like what you might encounter in the real world. This web page is set up so that it can present the text to the user at a size that's appropriate to their needs. I've got a little prompt here. Click on the text below to adjust its size. When the user clicks on this, a series of A's appears in various sizes. When the user clicks on one of these A's, the text is displayed at that size. So here I clicked on the largest A and the text is now displayed in a large font. If I click on the littlest A, then the text is displayed in a small. Now I'd like to show you the components of this program. First we have the HTML. It has a head section, it has the title as before, a script tag that loads the second JavaScript.js file, a link tag that loads the second CSS.css file, and the body tag, which contains the header as before and the nav section. Now we have a div with an ID of section 1. This is new. This was not in the last program. It initially has a class of hidden. This div contains the A's that are displayed for the user to choose among in order to choose what size text they'd like to have the paragraphs displayed in. Each of the A's is enclosed in a span tag that has a class that assigns the font size to it and an on-click, which when clicked will cause a program to run to change the text of the paragraphs to the appropriate size. Then we have our sentence that serves as a prompt, followed by a div section 2 that has all the text that we're going to change, with the exception of a paragraph that has an image in it, which we don't want to change when we change the text paragraphs. Next we have the CSS file. This contains the hidden and visible classes, which are used to change the visibility of section 1 div, the small, medium, and largest classes, which are used to change the font size that the paragraphs are displayed in, and also to show the font size that are available with the A's that are displayed above the text. Then comes the JavaScript. This starts out with an anonymous function that loads when the window first opens, and it calls setup section 1. This function looks for an on-click in section 2, and when that occurs, it runs an anonymous function that changes the class of section 1 from hidden to visible or visible to hidden, depending on what the current state is. Then we have 4 functions that change the size of the text in section 2. First, we find the target div, which in this case is section 2, then the target paragraphs, which are all the tags with a P tag in the target div, and we run through them in a for loop with an if statement here that if the target paragraph that we're particularly looking at this point, first element child has an attribute of alt, that means it's the image in the paragraph, and in that case we use the continue statement, which you saw previously jumps out of the for loop and goes back to the top of the for loop. It does not exit the function entirely. It just skips that iteration of the for loop. All of these paragraphs are the same except for the size that the text will be set to when the font is changed. Now I'd like to show you how we can use Firebug to monitor the progress of the code while it is being run. So we're going to open up Firebug. Here we have our script tag open. We've set a couple breakpoints in here. One at line 21, which has our if statement. If the target paragraph I dot first child has attribute alt, we're going to continue, which means we're going to jump back to the top of the for loop for the next iteration. And if the paragraph does not have an attribute of alt, we're going to drop down and execute the line of code that says target paragraph I dot class name equals small, which is going to set a class of small on that line of code, which will change the size of the text to small. So we need to go back up here and click on the small a so that that is the code that will be executed. We've jumped down here into the Firebug code and we see that there is a yellow diamond arrow over the circle where we set our first breakpoint. That means it's come to this point in the code, but it hasn't executed this line of code yet. We can go over to the console, and I have 3 lines of code here. Print out in the console log what the current value for the iteration is, what the first element child of the target paragraph we're looking at is, and print out true or false whether or not that first element child has an attribute of alt, indicating that it is an image. We'll go back over here into the script, execute the continue. It jumps down here to target para I class name equals small, and go back over here to the console, run, and in this iteration you see that the iteration counter is 0 and it does not have an attribute of alt, which means it does not contain an image. And in fact, the behavior of the code was as we wished it to be. It came down here to execute the line of code that will change the class name for that paragraph to small, and in other words will set the size of that paragraph to small font. We're going to run the program again and see that it jumps back up to our if statement. Wants to execute this again, we're going to look at the console statements that we have and run them. This time our iteration code is 1. Again, we do not have a tag that indicates that this has an attribute of alt because the value here on this statement is false. When we go back to the script and continue execution, it jumps down here to the line of code that will change this text size to small. When we run the program again, you can see that both the first and the second paragraphs, the text size has been changed to small. Go back here to the console because we're ready to execute our if statement and see if in fact this next iteration has in fact the code that we're looking for. So we're going to run our console log statements, and this time our iteration counter has a value of 2, but we have an image here, and the attribute for that first element child is in fact alt, and you can see that right here in the code. So this time we would expect to skip the statement that would change the class font size to small. We're going to run the code again, and if it skips this line of code, we won't hit this breakpoint. It'll go right back up to the if statement. And that is in fact what has happened, and we can tell that by going over here to the console log and running our code again and seeing that now we're at iteration counter of 3. Now again we're at a paragraph that does not have an image in it, so we should expect again for the code to go down here to the line of code that will change the font size to small. And in fact that is what has happened. So at this point we see that the code is working the way we want it to. So finish execution of the code, we just take off the breakpoints and press continue, and then all of our paragraphs size changes to small. and our paragraph here containing the image is not changed.